everybody. I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead. This week, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to Annalisa Dinnella, who is a blind writer for TV and radio, and whose most recent credit is Series 4 of Sex Education. My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hi, Annalisa.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you. How are you?
I'm feeling good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. How's your day been?
It's been quite frantic. I thought I had 2 weeks to deliver a draft of a script, and I just found out I have 1 week.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, that's very normal. It happens all the time.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I can imagine that would be quite stressful.
Yeah, you learn to deal with it.
Yeah, I imagine you do. So to begin with, can you tell me a bit about your VI condition and when you lost your sight?
Yes, absolutely. So you described me as a blind writer, and I never quite know how to describe myself because I do have a good little chunk of functioning vision, reliable-ish, in the center of my visual field. So I have a condition called retinitis pigmentosa. And it's a genetic condition, you're born with it. And essentially the rods and cones in the back of your retina sort of gradually eat themselves throughout your life. And I can never remember the exact biology, but for me, so the retinitis pigmentosa is that the bits of your retina that control your peripheral vision and your night vision are the bits that are first affected. And then the rods, which I think control your central vision and your colour vision and your visual acuity, then become affected once the periphery and the night vision is gone. So I've sort of kind of they call it a sight loss journey. The RNIB call it that. I'm not sure quite how I feel about that phrase. But yes, I have sort of had kind of periods of noticing that I have less sight than I used to, but it happens sort of so incredibly gradually that it's almost imperceptible.
Right, okay. So when did your passion for writing begin?
Well, I think it began when I was probably about your age, and I started being assigned essays at school. And I used to just really, really look forward to writing my essays. And I used to sort of put aside like a weekend day and put snacks on my desk and a cup of tea and just really enjoying the process of putting the words together and like designing sentences. So I think that's when I kind of realized that words were my thing.
Right, okay. I do kind of know what you mean about the essays, but like I think I only enjoy it when it's like a descriptive writing piece in English. Like if it's just a sort of non-fiction essay, I dread it. But if it's like creative writing, I really enjoy that. I always have done.
Yeah, I agree that it's way more fun. But I think I also just kind of started to like the idea of constructing an argument. And I think I've always been a bit of a structure fiend. And that comes in quite heavily when you start screenwriting, is like really being clear on your beginning and your middle and your end, and how you want someone to feel at the end, and the kind of process you want them to go through when they engage with your work. And I think essays, again, for me, when I kind of realized that they had a structure, that got me quite excited.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So, what do you enjoy about writing?
Probably the fact that I don't have to be able to see. I think that just not having that extra added pressure of, I ought to be able to be using visual information, which sort of applies to so much else in life. So having sort of the stress taken off that maybe was part of the joy. I think I find it very calming and very regulating. I think it's a sense of control. And certainly when it comes to creative writing, a kind of megalomaniacal, godlike control freakery where you get to decide what happens is really a lovely side of it as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, as a person with a disability, what obstacles and challenges have you faced during your career?
Well, I started off, with much more sight and much more privilege, and many, many more choices. So when I left university, I could still pass for sighted and I could read books. So there weren't as many obstacles then. But I found traveling really, really challenging. And the job that I was doing, I was a researcher for documentaries. And they would often send me places to meet people to find things out. And that really was hard because I still was visually impaired. So that was a problem. And I sort of gradually had to realize that I had to, if I wanted to have a career, rather than just focusing on all the things I couldn't do and kind of feeling the frustrations of that, I really decided to look at what I could do and what I was good at. And what I was always really good at was the writing. And so within the job of researching, there's an awful lot of writing. And so I just spoke to the people in the company I was working for and just really did more and more of that as my site kind of went. And then I decided that screenwriting, if I wanted it to be more than a hobby, I needed to take it more seriously. And so I did an MA. I did a master's in screenwriting at City University. And that really forced me to take it seriously. And the obstacles at that point were, I think part of the joy for me of writing was feeling like I could just sit by myself and write. And as long as what was on the page was good, it didn't matter. Nothing else mattered. But unfortunately, if you want a career in television, you do have to show up places and you do have to network and you do have to do a whole bunch of physical stuff in the physical world. So I found quite a lot of that quite challenging at the beginning because I felt like the industry wasn't as accepting of disabled creatives maybe 10 years ago as it is now. Now it's so different. I'm part of, I don't know if you've heard of them, an amazing organization called DANC, the Disabled Artists Networking Community. I'm very proud to be an ambassador for them. And I also was part of kind of writing guidelines for disabled creatives to use when they, if you find yourself taking on a job where you're the only disabled person, there are various guidelines and places you can sort of go to self-advocate and to make sure that your needs are met, etc. So now I very rarely face obstacles. In fact, when it does happen, I'm always unpleasantly surprised and remember that it used to happen all the time. So yeah, I think now is a really good time to be disabled and try and get into this industry and this line of work.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's brilliant that you face a lot less obstacles now. But I think obviously I'm only 14, but I think facing certain obstacles and challenges, it makes you a lot stronger.
Yes, it makes you stronger. It makes you resourceful. It makes you a problem solver. Like you probably solve hundreds more problems before you've even had breakfast than most kids. And that is one hell of a asset. Anyone who is choosing who they want to work with would be very attracted to the kind of mind and soul of a person who is just going through life solving problems all the time. And facing challenges all the time and overcoming them all the time. So I think people are starting to realize that, having a disabled person in the workplace with them is a hell of an asset.
Yeah, I think that, and those challenges that you sort of learn to face, they are just day-to-day life. And I think you get used to it. You don't don't really think about the fact that you're having to solve so many more problems than an able-bodied person. And it's like you said earlier about that realization that you can't, obviously the things you can't do are frustrating, but you have to just sort of accept that you are going to have things harder than someone who doesn't have a disability.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the other thing also is just that real kind of wider perspective that I think we have, in that we won't make a great big fuss about something minor because we deal with stuff all the time. That's not the greatest way of expressing that notion. But I think that, you know, when you live with lots of limitations, when a limitation is thrown at you, you don't really bat an eyelid. Whereas people who never, ever have limitations thrown at them don't really know where to start when a limitation comes their way.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think that the advancements in technology over the years assisted in making your career more accessible?
Yes, without question. And it came at just exactly the right moment for me. So Audible, I mean, I'm sure you have an Audible account, do you?
Yes, yeah.
So I'm trying to think when Audible came onto the scene, but getting an audio version of a book used to be really, really hard. And now, if I'm working on a project and a producer says, we need you to read these 3 books, the first thing I'll say is, can you get them to me in an audio format? And that's not a weird question. And usually the answer is yes. And that's something that I've really noticed, like that has changed so rapidly, so dramatically in maybe the last, I'd say 10 years. So that's a huge one. And podcasts. So I'd got thrown a really lovely idea last week. Someone chucked an idea at me, a really fabulous producer. I can't say what it is, but it was sort of looking into it was creating a detective show with a detective who was a hobbyist, a very particular kind of hobby. And like I could have spent hours kind of straining on Google trying to find articles about this particular hobby. But I went straight to my podcast library and just typed in that hobby. And 3 or 4 fascinating podcasts popped up with interviews. And, you know, within 2-3 hours, I knew so much about this particular thing that I knew nothing about before. So, you know, Audible formats are a game changer for me. And then, of course, the other big technological advancement is what we're using now, which is Zoom.
Yeah.
And before lockdown, I was at a point in my career where lots of producers wanted to have meetings, and they have these things called general meetings. And it's a little bit like an audition. So an actor goes and meets a casting agent or a director. And it's really just, the idea is that they just take a look at you, have a cup of tea, have a chat with you and get a sense of who you are. Well, this exists for writers, and producers say, come and have a cup of tea, come to our office. And they're not offering you work. They just want to meet you. You go on a list and you're sort of on their radar for potential things. So it's a very good thing to do, to go to these meetings, but they're entirely speculative. And for me, going to these meetings involves access to work, cabs, trying to get someone to meet me at the place, finding my way around an office. By the time I sit down in front of someone, I'm quite exhausted, quite stressed out. I'm not really going to give them my best interview. And, you know, you lose a writing day. And for me, writing days are incredibly valuable because I'm also trying to parent. So as soon as Zoom came along, I just said, I'd love to meet you. Let's do it on Zoom. And I could fit in a couple of Zooms at the end of the day. And I just met tons of producers and got loads of work from it and didn't have to leave my office. So I sometimes think, I can't imagine having to go back to the world the way it was 5-6 years ago and having to go to all those meetings. So yeah, those are the 2 things for me that have made a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, Zoom is absolutely amazing, and obviously especially during lockdown as well, it was such a game changer for so many people. But I mean, like you mentioned earlier about audiobooks, I love audiobooks so much. Like it's always been, ever since I was little, a bit of an escape. Like just putting my AirPods in and just listening to an audiobook has been such a way to just breathe and calm down. And like, I listen to audiobooks a lot more than I actually physically read books, because I read Braille, and a book in like a 500-page book in normal print would probably be about like 5 volumes or something like that in Braille, which is a lot to just have chilling in your bedroom. So I absolutely love audiobooks, and I do that a lot more than physically reading.
Do you worry that Braille might die out because of that? people stop using it?
I don't think so, because like, I still read Braille a lot. Like, if I didn't use Braille, I'd have absolutely no way of reading or writing. And I think it's a tricky one, because I don't know. Do you read Braille?
No, I never learned. And now I sort of think I don't need to.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, because there aren't actually that many blind people that do read Braille. But I think the ones that do, it's because it was almost a worst case scenario. If you didn't, you wouldn't be able to read and write. But then on the other side of the spectrum, because technology is so good now, you can just read everything through text. So I don't know if Braille does die out, it won't be for a while, but it could do.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've never even thought about that, to be fair. But yeah, it definitely could do, because technology is becoming so much more advanced now.
Yeah.
So I know that you are a mum. So as a blind mum, what are some of the struggles you face?
Well, so I set up a group called the Blind Mums Drinking Club about 10 years ago or so, because when my son, who's 9, was very little, I felt quite isolated, because he was one of those kids that will just run straight into the road. My daughter, who's your age or a little bit younger than you, Evie, she was one of those kids that will hold your hand and walk gently down the street. So it was really when my son was born that I felt much more limited, because I couldn't risk walking out my front door and taking him to the park by myself. So I just had to be super organized. I had to, again, it's like, what are the solutions? What are the ways to make this work? How do I make this work? And, I got support, I got help. I hired a really amazing nanny. I did a nanny share with like a couple of other families. And I think 3 mornings a week, she'd come and pick him up and just take him to the park, and he'd run around like a maniac. So, I kind of thought, well, just because I can't do something doesn't mean he can't have it in his life. I just have to find ways. But that was a really hard, difficult period for me. Then obviously, as he got bigger, it was much easier to take him about by myself. And actually, I have friends who have far less sight than me. So when I started the group, I met a whole load of other mums, and they could see much less than I could. And they were able to, take their kids around independently. And they didn't find it anywhere near as stressful as I did. So, it's different for everyone, I guess. And I found out a lot from speaking to them as well. So I think reaching out and finding your community is a huge thing. And that would be like the one piece of advice I'd give. And the one thing that was, the most useful kind of way that I could help myself was talking to other people, and remembering that I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only visually impaired mum in the country.
Yeah, definitely. I think reaching out is really important, but also it can be quite scary to reach out sometimes, and you sometimes feel quite ashamed about asking for help, but it is really important.
Yeah, I had a really big revelation about asking for help a while ago. And it was through speaking to someone who said to me, but when someone asks you for help, how do you feel? And I realized I actually really love it. I love helping people if I can. If it's something I can do, it gives you a wonderful kind of feeling of being useful. And I realized that actually sometimes people actually, really appreciate being asked, and that if you're willing to give help, then you're absolutely willing to ask. That giving and asking are sort of equal, they're the same thing. And that in the world, we all give and we all ask. And as long as you're doing both, I think times when I feel bad about asking for help is when I feel like I'm not giving anything back. And then I really have to look and say, well, how am I giving back? Even if it's not to that person, if I'm giving back to someone else, or if I'm doing something else that I think is of help to someone, then it's kind of a cycle, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm the same as you. Like, I am always really happy to help anyone who asks for it. But then it's weird, because if I need to ask for help, I will literally, and I'm getting better, but definitely as a kid, I would try my best not to ask for help, because I was like really ashamed of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of shame that we carry around. I think everyone does. Non-disabled people are just as plagued with weird, random, irrational shame. It never makes logical sense, shame, I don't think. and people carry it for all sorts of different reasons. And again, it's really fascinating. Like I actually read a few books about shame a few years ago, and that really helped me to kind of realize when I was feeling it. And it was exactly as you say, when you're asking for help. And then when I realized I didn't have to feel it, the asking for help got a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you said, shame's such a weird thing because there is sometimes no rational, logical reason why. It's just almost like a human instinct.
Absolutely.
So do you think that there is a good support network for parents with disabilities?
I mean, that's a good question. I think that's probably an area that needs a bit more work, actually. I mean, just thinking about TV, one of the areas, because we talk about representation a lot in screenwriting and in television. And one of the areas in a recent DANK event I was at, quite a few of the disabled creatives were saying they don't see disabled parents represented in TV drama enough. And I just thought that was really interesting. And certainly my experience as a disabled parent, I've never seen that represented ever. I think if the only time it's ever represented is usually by someone kind of who doesn't really understand the situation and making some sort of mawkish tragedy out of it, or, you know, making it far more kind of like, this is the drama. And I think, why not just show disabled parents like just living their lives, and the drama can be somewhere else. So I think the fact it's not represented very much maybe speaks to the fact that it's not really something that is kind of in the psyche, and that maybe they're you know, maybe the disabled parents themselves haven't kind of found that strength in numbers and created enough of a community yet. I know that I get the various emails from the London sight loss, I don't know what it's called now, UK sight loss. There's a lot of sight loss community stuff out there, and sometimes there are chats for parents. And as I say, there was my blind mum's drinking club, and there was another, I'm trying to remember the name. Sorry, I'm failing to give you the actual names of the actual groups, but I know they exist. There was a Facebook group that was really good for a while as well. But yeah, I think with the sight loss community, I've never felt like it's as strong as, say, the deaf community or other communities within disability.
Yeah. So I know that you wrote and presented a documentary for BBC Radio 4 called Annalisa is Awkward. Can you tell me about this documentary?
Yeah, that was really fun. It was about the link between disability and awkwardness. I read a statistic somewhere about 70% of non-disabled people feel awkward when they're talking to disabled people. And I was in talks with this documentary company, and they said, do you have any ideas? And I just said I'd read that statistic, and I thought that could be quite a fun subject, because it just seemed like it was right for sort of comedy and having the piss taken out of it and examining it, but playing around with people's awkwardness. And I thought awkwardness is such a uniquely British thing anyway, and it's usually very funny. So that's where it came from. And it was a really wonderful experience. And through it, I think I learned quite a lot. And the kind of big takeaway for me is that we need to embrace awkwardness. We don't need to run away from it. And the awkwardness belongs to the other person usually, and we can't live in fear of it. And actually, there's something wonderful about leaning into awkwardness and letting it happen and being honest about it. So I kind of came away from it kind of being someone, having started off with someone who lived in fear and was always living my life to avoid awkwardness, as now someone who makes a conscious effort to, when I feel it, to really lean into it.
Yeah, I mean, I know from my experience, I go to a mainstream high school. So obviously when people see me walking down the corridor with my cane, I get a lot of different reactions. But the one I see the most is just people kind of quite scared. They don't really know what to do, and they kind of just freak out a little bit. And I never know what to do in that situation. So I just sort of walk past and pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah, I think this is the thing. It's like what they kind of need is for you to guide them through their awkwardness and help them get to the other side of it. So what people need is for us to sort of come in, take charge, say, here's a situation, here's what we need you to do, here's how this is going to work. And that's all very well, but actually that is exhausting, and you can't live your life going around dismantling everybody else's awkwardness all the time. You wouldn't be able to you wouldn't have time to sleep. You wouldn't have time to do anything else. So that's kind of the other thing, is like, when you're in a situation when people are being awkward, it's useful to have the tools and to know how to handle it, and also to know how to not internalize it and feel like it's your fault. It's not your fault, it's theirs. But it's also important to know when it's just not your problem to solve and you just don't have time, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I think that whole thing of like, it's not your fault, it's theirs, is a really, like, it's a really tricky thing to realize. But once you realize it, it really helps, like, knowing that it's not. I often find that people are quite scared to talk to me. And I always think like, oh, is it something like I'm doing? And I'm like, no, it's not me, it's them.
It's them, and it's the ableism that they have absorbed through their young lives of just, this is unfamiliar. I don't have blind people in my family or on television or whatever. This is unfamiliar. I don't know what to do. And also, for some reason, I'm a little bit frightened of it because perhaps I've seen it as a negative thing. And so that's them, that's what they've sort of absorbed through culture or through prejudice or whatever. And it's their job to undo that. And it's, if you see it, I mean, you know about the social model of disability, I assume.
Do you know what? I don't know if I've ever heard of that before.
Okay, so the social model of disability is looking at disability as saying, I am not disabled in, like, inherently in me. I am disabled by society. So I am disabled by the fact that the world isn't designed for me. So I'm disabled. So, for example, if I was a wheelchair user, I am disabled by the fact there isn't a ramp. That's what's disabling me. It's society. It's the world around me. Because if the world was designed for me, and if all the obstacles were taken away, then I actually wouldn't be disabled. So it's taking it off you as a person and putting it on the world around you. So if you use that framework for when people are funny with you in the hallway, etc. It's exactly that. It's understanding that there are prejudices or assumptions or misinformation, or just simply, just as you say, you know, lack of knowledge. And those things belong to the world. They don't belong to you.
Right. Okay. I thank you for explaining that to me, because I actually hadn't heard of that before.
Oh, great. Well, you know what? I only heard about it. I mean, I must have been in my 30s before I actually had the social model explained to me. And I found it really liberating.
Yeah, it is. I totally get that. So I know that around 20% of the population in the UK have a disability, but are not overly represented on screen. So do you like to incorporate disabled characters in your writing?
I really, really try. I think it's really important. And yeah, is there a great part for a great disabled actor in this script? Whether I write the character as disabled or not, because another great thing is the concept of incidental casting, where you have a bunch of characters and you can say to the casting director, anyone can play this role. So please take this out to disabled actors and we can tailor it for them. So yes, definitely. I was recently given a idea about police responders, and my script editor and I were talking to police officers as part of research, and we were like, are there any disabled police responders? Like, which disabilities can work with this job? And it was really frustrating because there were very few. And we were like, are we flogging a dead horse here? Are we trying to crowbar something in that just isn't the way it is? But then, of course, there's the way of looking at the world, and certainly looking at drama, where you say, well, why can't we create a more aspirational world where these things can exist and model it, you know? So yeah, I think there's always a way.
Definitely, because even if so let's take like the police responder thing, for example. Even if there are very few police responders with a disability, if you through that drama sort of paved the way for that to happen, you never know what could come of that.
Absolutely. And so one of the shows that I've recently worked on is Sex Education. And Sex Education is very well known for sort of creating this utopia that doesn't really match the real world, where people of all sort of different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different sexualities, all are best friends, and in a way that you think, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if that was really the way? And so in the most recent series, the kids go to this high school where a bunch of trans kids are the most popular kids at school. And, you know, we've had so many messages from people saying, oh, if only Wouldn't that be amazing? One of the characters is trans and disabled, and she's probably the most popular kid in school. And I think it does gradually seep into culture without question. It does help people to understand, oh yeah, of course, why couldn't someone who is a little bit different be like this sort of thought leader among their peers at the age of 16? Like, why not? So yeah, I think that is definitely the way. And I think sex education, one of the reasons I'm so proud of working and writing for it, was that I really think it's done an awful lot of good in the world.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I did watch some of sex education because I knew that you'd worked on it. So I watched some of it for research, and yeah, it is really good.
Yeah, well, I wish I could take credit for the whole of sex education. I only worked in the most recent series, which is series 4. And the real genius behind it is a wonderful writer called Laurie Nunn. And she's just a complete genius, and her work is amazing.
So what has been the proudest moment in your career so far?
Well, when my name comes on the screen, so the 2 times in the last year, I worked on a show called Ralph and Katie, which was on BBC One, and that came out last October. And then my sex education episode came out last month. Both times so my son and my daughter, they both refused to watch sex education. My daughter, she's 13, and she's just so embarrassed, just utterly mortified. And my little boy is like, Mummy, this is gross. I don't want anything to do with it. And that's totally fair enough. So with sex education, I didn't ask them to watch it, but I paused the TV when the credits came up and the kids came into the room and we took a photo, and they were like, wow, that's your name. And then with Ralph and Katie, it was different because they watched it and they loved it. And then at the end, when it said my name, they were like, that's your name. So I think definitely having my kids see my name on the screen is the thing that, it's like the pinnacle. It's the moment you can distill and keep forever.
Oh yeah, I can imagine that would be like the best feeling in the world.
It's really lovely.
So those are all my questions. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been so lovely to meet you.
It's so lovely to meet you too, Evie. This is a great podcast.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I know that you're very busy, so I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk to me.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you to my audience for listening, and I will see you all next time.